New employment equity targets have been published this week by the Department of Labour. The new rules mandate bosses to take steps to achieve equity targets or face financial penalties. About 94% of designated employers were found to be non-compliant during recent Labour Department reviews. Now, while these new rules could see a new era of accountability, are they coming at a time when business is already under so much pressure trying to navigate load shedding and the attendant costs? Let's speak now to Jonathan Goldberg, Chairman of Global Business Solutions. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I wonder if you could just start by, in a nutshell, just explaining what the rule changes actually encompass, which sectors are most likely to be impacted.
Good evening, Sally, to you and your viewers. I think the most important, these are amendments to the Employment Equity Act that's been around for some time. So the amendments to the Act signed into law by the President, but no implementation date. The implementation date is expected to be the 1st of September this year. But there are a number of things that have to take place in terms of those amendments before the amendments come into law. And the most contentious being the sectoral targets in 18 sectors of the economy, where the Minister will be entitled to set these targets over 5 years for these 18 sectors. That's where the challenges are coming, and that's where some business quarters, some trade unions like Solidarity have taken exception. Actually, Solidarity have lots of papers based on the constitutionality of those. So that's one aspect. It's a contentious aspect. I'll talk to other aspects later, but that's the big aspect. Now, it's important to understand for the viewers that employment equity has been around for a long time, and the fines that are, I think, the big issue in employment equity legislation have been in place for some time. They go up to 10% of your turnover for non-compliance. So those firms that are non-compliant, the 94 in that survey, could be fined from 1% up to 10% of their turnover if they're non-compliant. And that has been around for some time, and that everyone seems to have forgotten in this debate. It is a bad time for the introduction of legislation, and there's heightened emotions in South Africa. Your last interview before the previous one around Russia, electricity, load shedding are contentious times. So it's in a heightened, stressful environment for business, labour, and everyone in South Africa.
Has anyone, any company, you say that the legislation around fining a company for non-compliance with employment equity, has anyone actually ever been fined?
There have been companies that have been fined, and I think the Department of Employment Labour is saying to get an employer to that stage of fining them is difficult. Now, up to now, before this legislation, these amendments, effectively, you'd have to set your targets yourself as an organisation. You would have to look at the demographics of the regional and national population, and then determine your underrepresentativity, do a whole lot of analysis, and then set your targets in a 3 to 5 year period. Now they've been set for you, and that's where the objection is, to say the Minister, on what basis does he set them? The 18 sectors of the economy. And give you one example where a potential problem is manufacturing is one sector. Now, as we know, manufacturing in this country is diverse from a luxury sedan sports vehicle right through to processing a chicken in manufacturing, as an example. So it's quite the range is quite wide, and to set targets without subsectors for that sector might be contentious. But the real contentious issue is that these fines have been around for some time, to my mind. These targets, if they set properly with sectors, in consultation with sectors as the legislation envisages, will not be a bad thing if they set and agreed on by sectors, and I'll get to that now.
All right, so it needs to be nuanced. The targets are now being set externally, so they need to take on board each sector's requirements and perhaps challenges as well. Talk to me about the sectors. You said that there are 18 sectors that are of concern. You've mentioned manufacturing. Talk to me about some of the others and what they're likely to be facing.
Well, most of the sectors have set, most of the test sectors, there's been targets set around about 50% for top management of black representation. Call it a top management. It's top management, senior management, professional management. That is really the categories that the targets will be set for. So take top management. On average, for most sectors, across the 18 sectors, there's a 50% target by 2028. Now, again, there are some sectors where these targets will be impossible to reach because of the skills coming through the system, and because of the shortages and because of the economic circumstances. Those are taken into account in the regulations. The regulations are yet to be published, but in the regulations, if you can't meet your targets by 2028, the ones determined by the minister, and you've got evidence that you had a bad economic run, there are not enough skills, you've had low staff turnover, and those kind of factors, then of course you'll get your certificate of compliance. What is the big driver here is the government is saying unless you get the certificate of compliance, you cannot do any business with the state. So that's going to be the driver instead of the existing driver of fines and prosecution through a court process. So that's where we're going to, and government, that section's been in the Act from the beginning. It's never been enacted. It's now been enacted, and the compliance issue is sectoral targets, plus you can't have been convicted, found guilty of a unfair discrimination claim in the last 12 months or been found to be not complying with the National Minimum Wage Act. But those are minor issues. The big issue is going to be sectoral targets and the justification for not reaching them.
So talk to me about whether small businesses, for example, are they excluded from these targets? We know that small businesses are vulnerable. We also know that entrepreneurs and small businesses are very much the future of employment. Will small businesses have to meet these targets as well?
Sally, I'm so glad you've raised that, because I was going to raise it myself. So it's not all doom and gloom. Let's go back to the sectoral targets for bigger and medium-sized business. Some of those sectors, of the 18 sectors, have already agreed with the Department of Labour, Employment Labour, that those targets are fine, and they've agreed to them. And that's a win-win situation where a sector agrees. And I'd say 3 or 4 sectors have agreed, in my estimation, with these targets out of 18. The big change, and we've advocated for that as business, and we've got it now. Under 50 employees, no matter what your turnover is, no compliance with Chapter 3, the affirmative action chapter. You've still got to comply with discrimination legislation, obviously, because we have a constitution that outlaws discrimination. But effectively, that's a big win for businesses under 50 employees. And again, we need to celebrate these wins. And again, I don't think enough noise has been made about the positives that are coming out of these particular amendments. The negatives we need to sort out to enforce the Department of Employment Labour to do a proper consultation sections with various sectors to ensure that we get realistic targets over a period of 5 years. Different sectors have got different skill sets. And again, Sally, I think the real big problem for me as a South African, being in the labour market for many years, I don't think we've had a comprehensive debate as to why we're not seeing enough people coming through the labour market. And that comprehensive debate talks about the billions and billions we spend on education that are wasteful, that are not producing the results that we want. That debate needs to happen. If you really want to solve for getting black people, mainly through the economy, into senior positions, then we've got to look at the whole issue, not only one part of the particular issue. So targets are a good thing in some respects where they're agreed on, but effectively the comprehensive debate needs to happen as to why are we not getting enough people coming through the system naturally. And a part of that debate, it's not the whole debate, is education and our failing educational institutions in producing the right type of skills for business and for the state.
Thank you so much for speaking to us this evening, breaking it all down so clearly. Jonathan Goldberg, Chairman of Global Business Solutions, is talking about the new targets that are being set around employment equity for key sectors. And now let's